Webinars on how to show business value, what CX leaders who get results are doing that maybe you're not. And we're going to focus today on really understanding what we've learned. First of all, let's go over to Nicole.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Newton. A little bit of my background. I worked for a Fortune 500 technology organization and was able to stand up a customer experience function inside that organization, which is where I absolutely fell in love with customer experience and journey mapping and driving change based on what the customer experience is.
And like Nicole, who led a very successful CX program, I led the world's lamest CX program that didn't get a lot done 12 years ago, and have been really focusing since then on what do great people do in terms of leading customer experience, what differentiates the best from the rest. And so Nicole and I came out with this book a couple of years ago now, almost, Nicole, and you'll hear today about the next one we're working on, but how hard is it to be your customer? And well, let's hop into it here. So first of all, this might be what it feels like to be you. It's one of the things that we heard as we talked to people in customer experience is that sometimes it feels lonely. You're in a small group, you're a little bit separated from the business, and so it might feel like you're all alone. But the reality is actually you're more like this, that you're part of a community, it's just a separated community, but you're not all alone, that there are others here. And that's what customer experience is individuals who are working to make a change. But if some days it feels like you're just not driving the change you expect, what we want to tell you is that you're actually not alone. You're not the only one who's not having impact. If you feel like that yes, we found a lot of people in interviews who just, they let their guard down. They said, I just don't know if we're really driving change. That we're definitely not driving change I want to. That's the bad news. Now, the good news is now, thanks to a lot of people giving us their time, we know why customer experience often is not driving change. And today you're going to hear a high level of what the best programs are doing. Our goal is that by the end of this call, you will feel empowered with the initial ideas and how you can drive change. Now, a few of you folks are a repeat. I've heard some of this before. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, those people we interviewed, we had a special preview version 2 days ago where we shared these results. For those folks, I'm talking just to those that were there. Here we're going to go more deeply into the first 4 and not go into the last 5 components. We're going to go really on these, go a little bit deeper here on these initial 4 things. But before we get there, let's talk about Jim, when you talk about this research, we involved over 300 people last year. Now, one of the things about last year is we had a little bit more free time than we normally do. I don't know if you felt that way. And so we reached out to a lot of you and involved over 300 people. We did over 100 hour-long interviews. We have filled up our video storage with videos of customer experience experts talking about what they do. I also had the opportunity to do deep dives into 3 programs. I saw Roxy Stromenger on this call from Ultimate Software, now UKG. She gave me 2 days of her time walking through how she runs a program. From there, I flew up to Michigan. I got to spend 2 days with Dow and Jen Zamora and her team there. And then Darren Byrne of Walters Kluwer, well, we were in the pandemic, so I've shadowed him virtually for a few days as well. And really learned a lot by doing that. I highly recommend you do that as well. We're calling it an externship. And we also did a survey with over 210 respondents. And I want to turn to that for a minute, because we asked participants, what gets in the way of you driving change? What are your biggest barriers? So if you were to answer that question, think, what would you say are the biggest barriers that get in your way of improving the customer experience? Here's what our participants told us, is that first of all, organizational complexity. There often are not clear decision rights. There's a mess of technology there. There's training, lack of governance. It all gets really challenging. We heard that from you as well in the interviews. Next, having enough or the right people. I have never yet found a customer experience program that feels they have enough people. And whether that's true, whether they have 2 or they have 20. We did in that same survey ask about the size of CX programs, and maybe you're interested in knowing that. Roughly about a third of programs who responded to our survey had 0 or 1 person responsible for CX. About another third had 2 to 5 people, and another 1/3 had 6 or more people involved with the customer experience. But even so, they felt they didn't have enough people or necessarily the right people. And then lastly, leadership buy-in. But by following the tips that are in here that we've learned from the best programs, you can actually overcome all of these. And so we're going to get into this as we look at what separates the best from the rest in terms of customer experience programs. And so when we look at that, we found that there's 4 things. On top, number 1 is determining how you create value. Now, it might sound surprising, and we know that, right? Well, actually, the best programs are very deliberate and explicit on how the business gets better through an improved customer experience. So we'll start with that. Then Nicole's going to walk us through emotions and how the best programs are managing emotions and measuring them differently probably than you are. From there, we'll talk about change management. And Nicole, keep talking about that because she is our change management geek. And we'll show that. You can see the pro side of the background. And then I'll come back again and talk about something that surprised me, which is that the best CX programs are using technology in specific ways to make a difference. But Nicole, let me talk about my favorite topic, which is starting with determining value. And what we talk about here is you don't just hope that customer experience provides business value. The best programs do the math. And I'm going to pick on Roxy here. I know she's here, and she was one of the ones we've really profiled a lot. We'll be talking about her today. But she told me her belief is that every CX pro should be able to run their own regressions. Now, I'm not quite there yet, but we're going to talk about that. You do need to show how you actually deliver value. And that's something that most programs are missing. And so what we've done now is we put together, and I realize there's a lot on this slide, and we targeted a lot of business to business and business to consumer programs, B2B to B2B to CX, or B2B or B2B to C. We're going to have an example coming up here from Stuart, who's B2C. But when we asked you how you determine value, most programs answered through an improved survey score. And the problem is that's not terribly compelling often to your business partners. You know, I'd ask people, does your CEO care about survey scores? And most would say yes. So I'd ask, does your CFO care about survey scores? And immediately, no. The CFO does not care about survey scores. Great. Where does your CEO spend more time? Looking at survey scores or talking to your CFO? And universally, it's the CFO. And so we found these programs are doing a great job of really tying directly their work and customer experience with one of these outcomes. So first of all, retention/churn. Now, if you have that as an overall number, that's terrific. Not every program does. Now, let's use a B2C example, Best Buy. If you don't shop there for 3 months, have you left them? Hard to say. But some can look, for example, at renewals. We worked with one client. They do sales enablement, and they have an annual contract. So they can look at the renewal. Or it's evil opposite. One and done customers. And we do a lot of work in life insurance, and this is more about the agent. If the agent works with you for one policy and never comes back, that's incredibly expensive. So tying your work to how the improvements you make prevent one and done customers, well, that shows a lot of organizational value. Next is share of wallet. And share of wallet is, especially for B2B, that's a big deal in most programs. SaaS software, maybe not so much. But in a lot of other areas, distribution, manufacturing, for example, share of wallet's huge. If you're not familiar, share of wallet is the percent of spend in a certain category that is going to your company. And the problem is it can be really hard to measure. Now, using the life insurance example, if an agency gives you 10 policies, is that 10 out of 12 or is that 10 out of 100? So since that's hard to measure in absolute dollars, we found one way of doing that is asking a survey. Another way is using categories ordered. So going back to the life insurance example, if they're ordering life insurance from you, are they also doing annuities? Are they doing other products, long-term care? And so selling people across product lines is another powerful way. And then lastly, upsells. And this one fits better with, for example, SaaS, is being able to sell additional products. Others we found was actually joint innovation or selling innovation products, which in manufacturing can be products developed in the last 1 to 3 years, tend to be higher margin. If you can show your work leads to customers buying innovation products, hey, that's a home run. In growing companies, especially SaaS, we find referenceable clients is a much bigger deal than I ever expected. Coming into this a year and a half ago, I never really saw that referenceable clients was as big of a deal as I've learned it is now. And the last area, and Stuart's going to talk about this coming up here, is cost to serve. Now that can be how long it takes to implement, for example, a software company, or how much time your company spends servicing on, for example, customer service issues. So we could do, and I think, Gina, we might be, I'm not sure. I think we're gonna do a whole webinar just on this one slide. I promise we'll break the slide down to more. But this is where the great programs begin, is they can tell you explicitly how they are impacting the bottom line through a customer experience effort. And so we're going to rely now on Stuart Gilchrist. Stuart is with Hertz, and he was very articulate on exactly how what he's doing is improving outcomes at Hertz. So let's hear from him.
So for example, if we know that they waited at the rental counter, whether we don't know the time, but suppose we say, okay, we know that this group of people waited at the rental counter and this group of people didn't wait at the rental counter. We're then able to use that data to kind of, and use that how likely are you to rent again question to split out the likelihood to rent again from those different groups. And then through some kind of modeling, which we've done 5 or 6 times on various different projects now, we're actually able to we know what the future order value is, and then we're able to say, well, the future benefit for the group who doesn't wait is this, the future benefit for the group who does wait is that, and then we're able to look at those differences. So we've got quite a sophisticated kind of approach in that based on real revenue that we're likely to get in terms of retaining customers.
That real revenue. And he goes on now to talk about a cost-saving example.
A great example of that actually is receipts. You wouldn't believe it, but we have a lot of customers who don't receive their receipt after the rental to their email address in a lot of cases because we don't actually have their email address on file beforehand because they've come through a third party or some other booking channel that we don't have that kind of ownership of. So then we get a lot of people who call us and say, hey, can you send me a copy of my receipt, please? So a couple of projects we did last year tried to kind of automate and provide ways around that for a lot of people, assuming we don't have their email address. How can we reduce calls to the call center? And a lot of those projects had some really strong ROIs because we would get tens of thousands of calls, each year, and each one of those calls costs a certain amount of dollars, and we know that we can save that money by preventing those calls in the first place.
So you heard him really talk articulately about, first of all, how we can predict future revenue based on our work. And second of all, how we can actually show how we're reducing costs. Now, having done over 100 of these, if I were to try to take the hour-long interview and get it down to a 30-second, 1-minute interview to determine whether the person I'm talking to is showing value, I would ask one question. Tell me what you're doing with your data. You heard Stuart talk a lot about being able to tie specifically to financial data as well as operational data. Behavioral is another category of data. That's the first thing. And this is something you can work on tomorrow, is start understanding the data that your organization captures, because that's what your peers are looking at. So if you can tie to that, that's the start of really trying to drive change.
Jim, it makes me think about how, with the data piece, how customers tell us things all the time, right? That aren't survey based, right? But they tell us with, how they behave, right? There's a lot of data about how many times they call us, right? And so I just always think of that, and that's such a rich source of, information about what customers are doing. This emotional piece, we want to talk about right? We're all human. So humans make decisions based on emotion, and then they try to rationalize it with logic. I think of Maya Angelou, who said, people may not remember what you said or what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel. And this is really appropriate here because it's that feeling, it's that emotion that is important. Now, we're going to talk about designing for emotion, because this ties into not only understanding what those emotions mean to your customers, but then how you innovate again. Like, what are you going to do about that? How are you going to design? So what we're saying is don't design for emotion, design for one emotion. You have to pick one. And we're going to come back in a little bit and talk about Roxy. But I want to talk about, this emotion word and feelings and what that's like, and thinking about, how you talk about that inside, your organization, and how customers talk about this, right? This is in their words, what that emotion is for them. I talked about the technology organization I used to work for. There were a lot of attorneys that we had as customers. And it wasn't always comfortable asking them how they felt about something. How do you feel? I had a number of you have heard me say this before, that I had an attorney tell me that he didn't have feelings, he had thoughts. And so I said, well, what are your thoughts then on this? And so they still have emotions, but just looking at the word as to what they call it, because that is driving the decisions they're making, and it's leading us to loyalty. As we look at these emotions, there's examples that we have that range from, happiness to enthusiasm. We'll talk a little bit about those. But when customers are having, this is from the Temkin group, when customers are having an emotional experience that's rated highly, 76%, 3/4 of them are promoters. So for the NPS folks, a promoter is on the NPS scale. How likely are you to recommend us on a scale of 0 to 10? Promoters are 9s and 10s. So that very highest category of likelihood to recommend. When the emotional experience is rated low, only 6% are going to recommend you. I'm even surprised it's that high. The other thing that happens when that emotional experience is rated highly, they are likely to forgive you, right? 63% willing to forgive you when you encounter a problem and you work through it. And in fact, there's science out there that shows us that this working through a problem with a customer is actually a strengthening event. I'm not suggesting that you create hurdles to work through with your customers. I'm just saying that is what happens, that once you've solved a problem with them, that can actually help you. And again, when the emotional experience is not rated highly, only 11%, are willing to forgive a problem. So as many of you are, looking at this, the customer experience, it's your world. And so we become a little bit of, we call them sort of CX monsters, right? Because you are understanding all of the journeys that you are going through. I know that I do. In having experiences, and I think about, how do I feel and what am I going to do about that? Did we end up canceling an insurance policy and moving to a different provider because I felt so frustrated with an onboarding? Yes, I did. But I look at it not as much as, I don't remember it as much as I was frustrated with it. I remember it as, oh, there's an emotion and it's driving my decision. Right. So we're going to talk more about, and just thinking about what those emotions are. And Jim, we could do an entire presentation on how easy to use and effortless are not emotions. Those are, so designing for those things are not the things that are going to really be drivers of your loyalty. Right. And those are the things we're looking for. So for designing for things like, and we'll talk about Haggerty, that's actually coming up, the company that is designing for happiness for their customers, right? Other organizations are designing for enthusiasm, right? Jim mentioned this need for referenceable customers. And what companies understand is it's not just enough to have an effortless experience or an easy experience. You've got to have enthusiasm from your customers to get them to that referenceability category. So I want to introduce this idea, and Roxy, our rock star, hi Roxy, we want to talk about emotions and what she's really done with this. We think about, and she talks about there's different emotions that are loyalty amplifiers and detractors. So she's got a list of those, but she's bubbled it up to one. And so this is the idea of, and we love this, that emotions as gainers and drainers. Right? There's our things that help you with loyalty and drive loyalty, and the things that detract from it. So I want to hear from Roxy. Roxy, I'm sorry, we don't have a video of you, but we have the audio of you talking about how you do this.
Are we activating the right emotions? Are we annoying and frustrating our customer, which actually has a stronger relationship toward loyalty weakening actions versus imbuing confidence, respect, which is actually more important than being happy? And it's like, guess what? Now I have insight.
Are you asking all those emotions, or how are you? So you're asking.
Select all. So basically, is it my neuroscience days in grad school that they would be upset that I'd be doing this, but this is the only way they could do it. I can't hook up people to a galvanic skin response system, which would be awesome. That would be. So here it's like a select all, taking into account that we experience multiple different emotions, completely taking into account at a singular interaction, completely taking into account it is a cognitive rationalization of said emotional experience. So all of that take into account. Mm-hmm. We have a select just 4 negative states that we know are the bigger ones, 4 positive states, and then we have like an other in case somebody wants to put out, I felt this, and gives them an opportunity to vent. I'll show you. If you look at the rank order of impact on loyalty, and especially weakening, it is frustration, annoyance, disappointment, and then anger. So then we can sit there and be like, oh, okay, now take into account what's very interesting is, sure, we've got appreciation, we've got happy, but guess what? There is not an ounce of confidence being activated. And we know that confidence in the sector that we're in is the most important loyalty amplifying emotion. And the fact that we're not activating it with that product.
Select all.
Exactly. So the fact that it's not being activated, that's a problem. So then this gives us, the way I look at this is it's like a spotlight. Let's put a spotlight onto certain pieces and then go, that's interesting. So now let's take a step back and say, how are we not activating confidence in our customers utilizing the product? What is missing? What do we need to do? Does it mean that we need to impart additional training for them to understand the feature functionalities? Is it the fact that some things are not clear, so they don't know exactly how to do some of these pieces? Like, it starts to get into how much of it is product experience, how much is it service experience, and that type of stuff. So that's the beauty of collecting this type of stuff and looking at it in this type of flavor and shade to sort of do that. From my perspective, this isn't rocket science. This isn't super unique. It's just not been done in a systematized, consistent way. That's my benchmark is, if I am thought about and my team is thought about in the beginning repeatedly, that's huge, because then I know that we will have the impact to guide them to be better. We might not win all of the battles of getting them to do certain things, and that's okay, but at least if we have a concerted amount of impact and shifting of things, we can do that consistently, that's huge. Because everything else, like, I know we're all talented on this team. This team is awesome. So we'll link it to business. We'll guide them all that piece, but it requires us to be brought in from the get-go. And that, to me, is a massive benchmark of success for any CX professional, is like that piece. Because if we're not, then it's a bunch of like rubber stamping. You're awesome.
And what her team did is they looked at that awesome team. I've met them. They looked at what those emotions meant in terms of business results, right? So using that data Jim talked about, right? Connecting that. Roxy, you probably ran your own regressions. That's a higher level of knowledge than many of us have. However, that was the connection. She was using that science, that systemized way that you talked about. I also enjoyed the part that respect is more important than happiness, right? So they're not designing for, if you have to pick one, what are they going to design for? What's more important? More important to be respected, but really designing for confidence is what they're doing, which is very different than thinking about, right? We talked about designing for an effortless experience, right? Some of those more generic things like that. This is, you know, how do we build confidence? So that is thank you, Roxy. That's a very big takeaway for us in thinking about how we design for that emotion. It brings us into this, to change management, and I'm sorry for my backdrop today. I'm fresh out of ProSci, a change management certification, which is a highly recommended. It's really, many of you have this in your programs, right? And it cannot be underemphasized, put it that way. There's so many pieces to change management, because what you're trying to do to improve the customer experience, right? You're going to ask people to change, many people to change, right? And that is a very personal thing that will happen. And so thinking about incorporating all of the things that you know about what helps people change, right? From using, we're big fans of kind of this ADKAR model, right? Which is about, you know, building awareness and creating desire for people, right? It's not enough just to tell a story, right? That's part of it. You've got to tell, you know, right? There is a story there. But that people need to understand. But it's like, how do we drive action and overcome this inertia? So a couple of things that we think about, you know, number one, Jim talked a little bit about executives, activating executives, but your sponsor, and giving them something to, that is over half of projects, change projects that have not been successful, have been attributed to the ineffective sponsorship, right? So thinking about the importance of who that sponsor is, and not only, you know, who it is, but what you're asking them to do, right? Because it's not enough to say you're the sponsor, but you can do some coaching to help them communicate. And communicating is another piece of who wants that information, like who the message is coming from is very important. And this is upsetting to our middle managers right now, because what I'm going to say is that the way employees want information is they want that high-level sponsor, their CEO, to tell them the business reason for doing this, right? This is a strategic reason. But when it comes down to individual change, and how an individual has to change, they don't want it coming from that middle management level. They want it coming from their immediate supervisor. So there's sort of one takeaway, thinking about your communication strategy. Who is delivering the message is also as important as what the message is that's being delivered. You know, we think about when we're looking at journey experience maturity and how to improve journey experiences, we want to make sure that you've got a compelling case for change, right? That you're activating executives that we talked about, right? That you've got this targeted plan, not we're going to do everything, but this is what we're targeting right now. And so being very tight on that scope, linking employees' roles to how they're involved in the customer. That connection, that was hard for us at organization I worked at, and it's for many organizations. You have people that sit in non-customer facing roles that don't have a great sense of how do I impact, what do I do, the reports I'm running, how does that impact the customer? And so building a lot of those tentacles to make sure that they're connected and understand the importance of their work and how it impacts the customer. And then we never want to forget the celebrating wins, right? And so celebrating wins, and my advice on this is don't have the party first. Don't start with the party, right? Have the celebration after you've actually got something that you can show and something that you've done, so people can feel good about this. Now, I talked about who the message comes from. Dave Seaton from nThrive talks about how he communicates and crafts messages and interacts with people is so important to change. It varies depending on who he's interacting with. So Dave.
It's an art and a science. And I can't give you a prescription for it, but there are a couple things that have been effective. One thing that's been effective is aligning to metrics that stakeholders already care about. And, you know, rather than trying to get people to care about your metrics, the customer experience metrics, align those to what they already care about, whether that's financial or operational metrics, depending on where they sit. So for example, if we can show, if you got a stakeholder that's that really cares about revenue, and you can show how improving the customer experience can lead to revenue retention and renewals and repurchase, then you've got that stakeholder's attention.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got somebody that really cares about operational performance, speed, quality, and cost, and you can show how improving the customer experience is also going to lead to operational efficiencies, then you've got that person's attention. So strategy one is tying customer experience back to metrics that stakeholders already care about. Strategy number two is understanding how your stakeholders like their data. In other words, you may have a stakeholder that really really likes qualitative data. They thrive on stories. This is what the customer told me. Here's an anecdote. You know, when I talked to this customer about this topic, they told me this story. Those kind of qualitative data points really resonate with some people. Other people are more numbers focused. They like the quantitative data. And so if I can say that, you know, 53% of customers said that this was a high effort experience, then okay, that's going to resonate with a more analytical stakeholder. So it's really about building those internal relationships, knowing your stakeholders, knowing what metrics they care about for their managing their business, and then how they like their data and what's going to resonate with them from a data perspective.
It makes me think of, and I'm going to get the quote wrong, but it was Nelson Mandela who talked about, and think of all the different languages in his country. He said, if you can speak to people in a language they understand, you can win their minds, right? But if you can speak to them in their language, you can win their hearts.
So the fourth area then, again, start out, and it's not linear in order, except that it starts really with showing value. That's where it begins. And that's the area to focus into, showing how you actually bring value to the organization. Within that then, emotions is the way you start driving that value, by really plugging into your customers' emotions and designing around that. From there, then use change management to get the organization to move, to do things differently. And then supporting all that is technology. And that surprised me. When we ran a survey of over 200 folks in customer experience, we found those who were really driving change were far more familiar with the organizational technology than the rest, and were actively involved with the tech team. And as a former IT guy, I mean, I understand you don't want to talk to us. I get that. But the effective ones are doing that. They're talking to the IT. They're using IT to make a difference. And they use it in two different ways. First of all, to keep better track of what the experience is today. We talked earlier about the data. And secondly, to actually change the experience. And so the best programs don't really rely on chance. They use technology to ensure a consistently great experience. And something we didn't expect to find, we found the discovery of the CX tech stack, and that change makers really use this to drive an improved experience. Now, many of you know us. We've been working now for 7.5 years, and until recently, we did not believe in journey mapping software. We're going to talk about that here. So first of all, everybody has a VOC platform. It might be high-end, worth $100,000. It might be a $10,000 program. Over 80% of all companies that we surveyed have some sort of VOC platform. That did not differentiate them. But if I were to ask a second question that I wanted to determine who is successful, you might remember the first question was, tell me what you do with your data. The second one is, do you use dashboards to drive the change? So this brings in the data, the value, potentially emotions, definitely change management and technology. We found the best programs almost universally had these dashboards that executives looked at. And the reason the executives looked at them is they didn't just have the sentiment data. We talked to a number of people who have dashboards with survey scores that the only time people look at it is when the bonus is coming due, assuming that they're bonused on the customer survey scores. But the great programs incorporated the business metrics, the KPIs, the average of on-time deliveries, the upsells, the business data, and matched it with the sentiment data to create a comprehensive story. And that's how they got them to care about the customer experience, because these dashboards showed a linkage. That was rare in programs not driving change, but it was really common in those that were. Now, the journey mapping software, that surprised me. Again, we hadn't until recently worked with it at all, but we found is that the great programs were using it not to visualize the journey. Now, again, our friends will know we use these change management maps here, highly graphical maps to grab attention, and those still have a role. But the one limitation is they are static. And so we find the great programs are using journey mapping software not to visualize the journey, but to track it, to create a living journey map so that when survey scores go up, it gets better. When average wait time at the call center gets better, it gets better. When you start missing on deliveries, it gets worse. They create a living journey map. And then more on the B2C side, we're starting to find that journey analytics and orchestration are starting to have a role and are allowing organizations to not just to track the journey in real time, but to change the journey based on an individual's needs. So we're going to hear a couple of examples from Olga. Olga is from, she's from Jordan. We worked with Aramex. She's going to share a couple of different examples of how she uses technology to drive her program.
So one of the first things that we've done last year was create a dashboard, an internal dashboard, basically, of all the different sources of feedback. Just because we have a lot of specialized internal tools where we're capturing feedback. So for instance, upon delivery, upon certain milestones in the journey, it's very technical, very internal. And then we have some of, we partner up with some research agencies that do the field work for phone calls, CAT interviews or whatever. Okay. So we wanted to have all of this in one place. So we've done that. And then on yearly basis and quarterly basis, we issue a summary report of the overall customer satisfaction and per region, per product, per country. Hopefully this year, once we're done with the CRM restructuring, we will report it per vertical, per industry as well. And we're trying just to embed, we have an internal dashboard for all of our other data, operational data. So, shipment routes, delivery estimates, delivery time estimates, delivery performance, lots of, boring operational stuff, purely technical and really specialized. So we're trying to connect customer experience data with that as well. So on a product level, we want to add customer satisfaction as part of the KPIs, wherever it is statistically possible or wherever it makes sense. And this year, what we're trying to do is also to figure out how to cascade it to a team member level. It's not easy, just because we feel that if I tell Olga the satisfaction level of customers in her country, it might mean something. But then if I tell her the satisfaction level of customers that she has dealt with, that would probably mean more to her.
There's a lot in that video, but you'll see how she embeds the sentiment data, what we're calling surveys, along with the operational data. You talked about how she brings in change management through technology to tie it back to the individual, really taking a very mature approach. And she goes on.
So one of those solutions was a WhatsApp chatbot that we launched the end of 2018, and we've spent pretty much the better part of 2019 optimizing. So we're pretty happy with that, because at the beginning of the year, we started off with 13% only who were using this to schedule their deliveries. So one thing for you to know about deliveries in the Middle East and the region, it's not like the US, where you have, for instance, my husband was in the US in December, and it's like very tidy, very nice. You get the Amazon, notification, and then the courier or the delivery guy would go to the mail room and deliver the packages there, and no one signs for it. He has like an automated lock. In some areas, it's a personalized delivery. So it needs to actually reach the person themselves, if it's a bank or a credit card. And in some areas, the address is not correct. We receive, or it's not accurate, or it's not updated. So we receive it from the database of the shipper, who may or may not have optimized their method of collecting the address. So we do our own verification. So the WhatsApp chatbot's major use case is to actually schedule, to provide the customer or the customer of my customer the ability to confirm the address and confirm the date and time of the delivery. And we started off with just 13% of customers who received those messages responding. We ended the year with 55%.
Wow.
And today we're at 60%. So this was the better, part of 2019.
She just heard how articulate Olga is, an understanding that she's with a global organization, but she's tied. She understands exactly where the data is, what's happening. She's down to understanding what the challenges are so that she can use technology to improve the experience. Now, did she write the WhatsApp app? No, clearly not, but she's driving it within the organization to make a change. Now, we do have a model on especially how that gets done. I'm just going to very quickly walk through that. We found the best programs are first very deliberately understanding who their customers and who their needs are, their most important journeys. From there, they start building measurement that's different from most. It's not just surveys, but using the operational, the behavioral, and the financial data, incorporating that into the measurement approach. Building a solid ownership infrastructure so that there are journey managers and journey owners who are making sure to get it done. Adopting change management as they really spur innovation, and then use technology to orchestrate the journey. And so that's really what these great programs are doing, is using emotion. Again, first of all, determining value. How do we impact the outcomes of the organization? It's not a small ask. It's a lot of work, but it helps you to show how you are making a difference. From there, they measure and manage an emotion that they use as the North Star for their target. From there, they then bring in change management to help the organization move and use technology to cement it.
So as a follow-up, as we look at CX through a journey lens, we've got a webinar series that's coming up, and we're going to be talking about all of those things. We're going to start one singular sensation. So this is Nancy Flowers, who's the VP of Member Experience at Hagerty, and Hagerty exists to save driving. So that's a pretty important thing that they do. But she's going to talk about, I'm not going to give away the emotion right now. You'll have to come and hear what she's designing for.
You already did.
Mentioned that. So please join us for that.
All right, and we do want to hear from you, specifically as we're writing this book. We're looking, you've seen some great examples here, but more with change management technology. I'd love to hear from you if you have examples there and to interview you as we start working on this book. But We've had a lot of great questions in the chat, in the Q&A. I encourage you to put questions up there. And Janita, let's hear what they are.
One of them is my favorite simply because I'm from the financial services background as well. So I'm going to go with that one first. But Kathy, she works at a B2B to C. Isn't that so? It's just a mouthful to say, but she works in financial services and a lot of our customers range from large banks to credit unions, auto dealer groups, smaller retail and commercial customers. So large, broad scale. We have a challenge of getting responses from the largest customers. So then our senior leaders tend to discount the findings because they're saying, well, there's representing your smaller and mid-sized customers. We're not actually talking to, the large customers. Do you have any suggestions for understanding the customer experience and getting customer feedback from those most valuable customers?
I have some thoughts, and maybe Nicole, you want to hop in. First of all, understand it's not easy. It is not. Second of all, question whether survey scores are your best way of measuring that. It may be, it may not be. We found that business reviews are far more effective at getting this insight, more qualitative than relying on the survey. But you may be able to get surveys. But the way to do that is not through sending more reminders. The way is not to send out surveys more often, but to make it important to your sales team. Not that they'll be judged, because that'll lead to gaming, but that to make it a tool your sales team cares about, because that's how you will get them on your side to ask people to fill out the survey to get that done. We find that some of the great programs are having their sales reps send out an email ahead of time saying, hey, our survey's coming up, so that they are making a big deal. Something else they do is that they don't do a once a year mailing to the entire list, but what they do is they break the list into quartiles or quarters, and then send it bring it to quartiles or fourths, and they send it every quarter to 1/4 of the database, because that allows them to be able to report regularly, which keeps the interest on the sales team. And it really comes back, if we go back to Nicole's talk about change management, to get the sales team involved to get customers to want to fill it out.
My comment is I think there's other ways to get that information as well, that maybe because it's clear that you're not speaking the senior leaders' language, right? That we don't have that information. So there may be other ways to get that. And I think about collecting it through, sometimes there's quarterly or annual reviews, there's account reviews. And so it's kind of building on Jim, getting the employees involved in that and having those conversations. But the survey ultimately may not be the way to really understand what's going on with that, those bigger organizations. I can relate. We had challenges with this because there are many buyers, right, inside the organization, and how we understand. We talked about decision makers and the economic buyer, and understanding what people's roles are. But in fact, that business to business, space, that decision making, they're showing that that's actually getting larger. Where it used to be maybe 3 people, it's moving closer to 5 people that you've got to think about. So I don't know that I was helpful with that and telling you your problem's even getting worse, but it's getting larger, may not be getting worse. But I just think maybe that opportunity to think about collecting it through a different avenue.
I think we probably do a webinar just on how to do account reviews right. Poor organizations have the sales rep do it all by him or herself. Great organizations make it a much more comprehensive big deal.
And that's a great point. We've launched this webinar series on a monthly basis this year on CX through a journey lens. And it's really because we have so much content that's coming from all these interviews. We try to jam pack it in this 1 hour webinar, but we really can't. So having us be able to go through each month, be able to kind of dive into more of these different topics that we talked about today is really the point. So we'll have a survey that comes out after this as well for you to kind of say, what do you want us to prioritize to have as the topics that we discuss? But thank you very much. Couple questions around.
There's one last thought as well. So what some of our clients have been asking to do is actually do executive briefings on some of this content. And we don't do the videos, but we talk through what the implications are and actually spend a little bit of time with the executives talking about what this means to the organization. So if that is of interest, we do have executive briefings available. Go ahead, Janita.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. A few questions that came around with Roxy and emotion, and that's actually going to be our next topic or month, just because emotion is a very new topic that we have. But one question is, how did UKG learn and decide which emotions are right to activate for their sector?
So it was actually done, and I hope we're okay saying this, Roxy, but basically a survey on potential. I think there were 30 different potential emotions. But coming back to the data is that Roxy did ask a self-professed loyalty question, but knowing that's not really very predictive or accurate, for the clients, the survey went out to not just clients, but others. She actually looked at the data and saw which emotions actually drove behaviors they wanted. Add-on sales, less expensive to serve, referenceable accounts. And so it's come back into that data. She tied it into that and went through a very deliberate process. And then we helped her to say more about what is the implications of that. Once we knew what they were, how does that play out in their customer base?
One question on Dave. Dave mentioned how he delivers multiple types of data, for different stakeholders. Like you give a story to somebody who wants more stories, you give quant to the people who really want that data and that drive to business. How does he deliver that information to different stakeholders?
Well, I did a follow-up interview with Dave 2 days ago because I love that quote. I didn't do the original interview and I wanted to learn more. And so first thing he does, he didn't ask this question, wouldn't answer it anyway, which is he goes to the MBRs, the monthly business reviews. So he learns how people think and how they like their data. Now, in terms of how he delivers that, their first work did not do videos. I poo-pooed him because we're big believers in video recording your interviews. They just took notes and they did it through verbatims. But now that with the pandemic, they have to do virtual, and it's a lot easier to get approval to click on record than it is to set up a video camera in somebody's office. So now they are doing video. For that part, the quantitative is done more through your traditional sharing examples. He doesn't use a lot of PowerPoint from what I could tell, but more just being familiar enough with the data that he can rattle it off and share it in the interest of a bigger point.
One question around, Dave also commented, he said he also uses a lot of PowerPoint.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Thanks, Dave. It's true. Yeah. How are CX government and committees set up? Because there was a couple of questions they're saying they're circling around ownership. Is there any examples that you can provide on how to establish CX governance?
Well, I know, Nicole, you have quite a perspective on here. I'll start, but then you'll correct me. So what we found is two different models. First of all, it's really critical that the governance results in action. If you're having a monthly meeting with leadership to walk through your PowerPoints, you soon will not have monthly meetings with them. It has to be action-oriented so that when you're bringing in the biggest issues, somebody in that room is signing up to solve it or to lead the issue resolution. And instead of you holding a person accountable, the other leaders do. So that's the first thing, it has to be action-oriented. Second of all, what we're starting to see happen is the concept of a journey owner. You may be familiar with a journey manager who is similar to CX role, except that typically CX is a mile wide and inch deep because you have the whole experience. A journey manager is the opposite. They're an inch wide. I only do onboarding, for example, but a mile deep, that we go really deep in there. A journey owner is an executive over that manager, maybe not literally, but an owner who owns the onboarding experience so that he or she can provide air cover for the journey manager. That's the second model we've seen, but that one's just starting to take place.
And as we think about, even if you're thinking about governance, the importance of that internal committee, we've seen a lot of them that aren't really sure what they're doing, right? So having that charter of what they're supposed to do and coaching them on that. And the other advice I have is look for your organization's power core. Thanks to Jean Bliss for she's the one who I heard that word from. But when I think about working at my organization, I had to understand how the organization got things done and what, kind of the power core, what mattered. By the way, the power core is often finance. But you can see if sales rules the world, right? But our finance people rule the world. But I also had to understand where work got done. And it turns out work did not get done at the more middle manager executive level, right? They weren't. So we staffed these action teams that we put together in our program with, I'm going to call them working vice presidents or senior directors. So they had some status because that was important in the organization, but they were also kind of hands-on, right? So it is really, Dave, you talked about art and science, but it comes into play here too. It's understanding, who would be really the right fit, how work gets done inside your organization.
Well, we don't have any more time for any more questions, but if you do have a few, feel free to follow up with us. info@heartofthecustomer.com. You can give us an email. Make sure to follow Nicole and Jim on LinkedIn as well if you aren't already, to get some more feedback. And then I will again follow up with an email for us with the recording to this. Then you have that, as well as being able to give you the info for the next month's webinar. So thank you everyone so much for joining. I hope you found this valuable.
Thank you.